Today we'll be looking at a theme I'm developing for an upcoming movie. We'll be using the fifth mode of the melodic minor scale, which is Mixolydian flat 6. Mixolydian flat 6 can be used in a lot of different ways. Here I'm using it to evoke this bittersweet feeling. It has a very nice combination of light and dark. So let's look at how I'm using this scale, this Mixolydian flat 6, and how you might be able to use it in your own compositions. Let's start with the construction of this Mixolydian flat 6 scale. I like to call it Mixolydian flat 6. That's what I see as the most common name for this scale. It has other names, but this name of the scale really tells you how to construct the scale right in the title. You start with a Mixolydian scale, so I'll play G Mixolydian, which would be all the white notes from G to G. And we take the 6th degree and lower it by a half step, so the E goes to an E flat. So here's the scale. A really beautiful sounding scale. It's got a nice combination of light and dark. If we start at the first 5 notes of the scale, we have a major sound, a very bright sound. If we play the last 5 notes of the scale, we have a minor scale. So it's got a really nice combination of those two sounds. Let's look at the chords that we can build with this scale. Here are our G Mixolydian flat 6 triads and 7th chords. Let's listen to these triads first. For the 1 chord, we have a G major triad, that kind of brighter sound and very stable. For our 2 chord, we have this very beautiful A diminished chord. For our 3 chord, we have another diminished chord, our B diminished chord. And then for the 4 chord, we have a minor chord, C minor. A very common movement in Mixolydian flat 6 is to go from our 1 chord to our 4 chord, our 4 minor, and then back to 1. That's a great progression to use, and you can get a lot of mileage out of just that. Our 5 chord is a minor chord, so we don't have that dominant sound, but that can still lead back to 1. We could go 1 to 4 to 5, back to 1. It's got a very different sound than if this were a major or simply minor scale. All right, moving on, we have our E flat augmented chord for our 6th chord. Very beautiful chord. Then for our 7 chord, we have an F major chord. And you can see how that would lead very nicely back to the 1 chord. We could even do something like this. 4 minor to 7 major to 1 major. That's a really nice progression. All right, now let's look at the 7th chords. So you can see for the 1 chord now, we've added this F natural on top, which makes this a dominant sound, a G7 chord. So that's not as stable as if we were to use just a triad, but it does have the sound of this Mixolydian flat 6 scale. And if you wanted something a little bit more floaty, that didn't feel like we were, resting as much, then you could use this dominant sound for your 1 chord. The next chord is this A minor 7 flat 5. Absolutely gorgeous. And I really like to just go back from the 1 chord to the 2 chord and back to 1. That's such a beautiful sound. All right, our 3 chord is also another minor 7 flat 5 chord, B minor 7 flat 5. Our 4 chord now is a minor major 7. So it's got a little bit more color to it now. We could go from our 1 to our 4 back to 1. Let's just hear that. Really beautiful. And I'm playing everything in root position so we can really hear these chords clearly. All right, our next chord is a D minor 7 for our 5 chord. Then the next chord is really my favorite, and one of my favorite chords of all time, the major 7 sharp 5. It's just such an incredibly beautiful sound. You can also call it an augmented major 7 chord. I like to call it major 7 sharp 5, again, because it's easy to understand the formula for the chord right in the name of the chord. This chord has such a strong feeling, and in my bittersweet piece, this is something that I lean on to give me that sound. We come from, let's say, our 1 chord, and I'm going to play it as a triad this time, G major. And then when we move to this major 7 sharp 5, you can hear all of the tension and feeling and emotion in that chord. Then for the 7 chord, we have this F7. And we can do things like go from the 4 chord to this 7 chord back to 1. And it's kind of like in jazz a backdoor 2-5. So I'm just going to do that. I'm going to go from this 4 chord to the 7 chord to the 1 chord. And I'll play the 1 chord as a triad. Here's what that would sound like. A really beautiful resolution. So that's another way to get back to the 1 chord. Okay, now let's look at how I've used these chords in the development of this theme. Looking at this, you can see that I've really stayed close to home here with our 1 chord. And I've used it as a triad with the added 9. I haven't used the dominant 7 on it, the F, which would be part of our G Mixolydian flat 6 scale, because I want to make sure that we really hear G as home bass, and the F would make it a dominant sound, so it would be slightly less stable. I love this move here from the 1 chord to our 2 chord, which is an A minor 7 flat 5. That's really beautiful, moving back to the 1 chord. And you can see that each time I return to the 1 chord, I return to it in a different inversion. So here it's in root position, here we have the B in the bass, then the D in the bass, and then back to root position. And that helps to build lines like this. We have G to A to B to C to D, and it also helps it to feel like there's a little bit of interest as we're returning to our 1 chord. So we're not hearing it exactly the same each way, but we're still feeling it as home. You have to be really careful when you do things like go from the G chord to our 4 minor chord, especially if you make the G chord a dominant 7th chord, because it can feel like it's tonicizing the C minor chord. So here I'm going to play G7 to C minor. And that could sound as if we're going to the C minor as a 1 chord. So you have to be very careful not to tonicize that 4 minor. And a lot of things will help you not do that, especially harmonic rhythm. So you can see after this C minor, we return to this G chord. And it is on a weaker part of the measure, returning to the G on a strong part of the measure on the downbeat, and then to this G on the 4th measure of our piece and sitting on it. So we're really hearing G as home bass, but you do have to be careful not to feel as if you've tonicized the 4 chord here. All right, let's listen to these first four measures. For me, these first four measures really have the bittersweet feeling that I want. The story is of a child who's lost her mother, and she's having a memory of her mother, so with that comes love and light, but also the pain of loss. So these major chords are really representing that warmth and that light. And these minor chords like this A minor 7 flat 5 and this C minor add 9 have that feeling of loss for me. As we move on now, we come to this chord, that E flat major 7 sharp 5. And for me, that is the moment where we really get that complex feeling of loss. Until now, we've established the G major home. And so we've got this sound in our ear. But now when we go to this sound, it's just so filled with emotion for me. So after we hear this chord, we move on and we return to the G, but we keep returning to this feeling of loss. I feel when I had the loss of my mom, it was a very circular feeling. It was something that I couldn't escape. It would always come back up. And so that's what I feel here as I move through here. We come to this D7 sus4 going to G, so it sounds like we're going to have a final resolution, but we don't, because we move right back to that sound of loss forming, this E flat major sharp 5. One of the things here to notice is that I've used a D7 sus4. That's because our 5 chord is a D minor sound. By making it a D7 sus4, we get more of a pull to the G chord. We get more of a dominant sound. So that's something you can do here. It's part of our G Mixolydian flat 6 scale. So we return to this pain and loss sound, then we sound again like we're going to resolve, but again we have this circular emotion coming up. We return one more time to this sound of the E flat major 7 sharp 5, and then finally we resolve and sit on our home chord, our G chord. But you'll notice that I've put the third in the melody. And when you put the third in the melody, it's probably the least feeling of resolution that you can have. If I were to have gone like this at the end, it would have really felt like we are home. If I had gone to the 5th, still feels like we're at home. But the 3rd still seems to have a sense of maybe we're going to continue on. All right, let's listen to the piano sketch now in its completion, and then we'll come back and listen to the full orchestration of this piece. For the orchestration, I've kept it simple, just strings, an English horn playing the melody, and a little bit of harp. You'll notice that I've transposed it up a half step to A flat Mixolydian flat 6, and the reason is that as I was working out the violin 2 part, I had this G here. Now I've transposed it up a half step to an A flat, but that G is an open string, so there was no chance for the violins 2 to be able to sweeten that note and add vibrato. So I've just transposed everything up a half step, and that works perfectly for this piece. The English horn has a very mournful sound, and I really like how it sounds on the melody here. That little bit of piano line that we had in the sketch, I've moved it into harp and used the harp to accentuate the bass note of what's now the E major 7 sharp 5. I've also used the harp later on to double the bass line starting on that same chord, the E major 7 sharp 5. Here it's an F flat in harp just because enharmonically that works out for the harp tuning. So we've got F flat and then we just double the bass line here. It gives a little bit of point, and that's really a nice way to use the harp, especially on something that's very delicate like this. All right, why don't we listen to the theme now, Luna's Lullaby. If you've got parents, give them a call. If you've got loved ones, give them a hug. Be good to each other. I'll see you all next time.